What do we mean when we say the gospel is life changing? Let's think about it. Like I said about Paul, it was complete 360-degree turnaround for him. You change. It causes such a change in you. Um, I was trying to think of some more people whose experience would be equivalent to Paul's. Can you all think of anyone? I'm sorry. Okay, Mary Magdalene. Even people, modern people, that have had such a life change that, uh, well, maybe like Hong Yang, having been raised in communist country. That would be a good example. But as we're talking today, think about everybody's got your own experience. But now my mom and dad both had extraordinary experiences of coming to God, especially my mom's because she knew God in a different way than my daddy did. So um, the fact that she had just walked in that church to go there to have something to do, just boredom drove her to church. And then to feel what she felt, she said when she walked in the foyer, that something just, a covering, just fell on her. And just, it was a comforter because it comforted her. And then to see that picture of Jesus in the church that she had seen in the Catholic Church and was, see, that's something, oh yeah, I know about that. I don't know about all this, but I know about that. And then she said the lady, and that's another reason she went to church another time was because there's going to be a woman preacher. And she said she never heard of such a thing. You know, she had to go see that. And she turned. Her name's Amanda Miller. And she turned and blessed the Lord Jesus by using that picture as a point of reference. And that was something she knew about because that's what a priest would do. So, God, I mean, when you think about all those little things that God lets fall into place for people, building on what they know, like I said last week, you can only walk in the light that you have. So every day we want our light to grow, cast a larger shadow, and for us to become more knowledgeable and walk in a greater light. Now, James Short had a great testimony, right, Ruby? I was thinking about your all 65 years of marriage. How old were you? 16. James, how old were you? 17? 19? Mm-hmm. Uh, well, it must have worked because here you are smiling. Sometimes James tells us his testimony when I ask him to about the man from Long Island, hmm who turned his life around. Amen. You beat the odds, didn't you? You beat what people said. Don't listen what people say about you. You listen to what God says about you. Yeah, right. hmm Because without marriage, the family unit is fragmented, and uh, you know how it is, stepchildren. And I had one little boy say, well, he meant to say his stepdad, and I mean, his dad was his dad, but he called him his ex-dad because he just got it mixed up, I guess. You know, he'd heard the word stepdad because his mom had another husband. So his real dad must be his ex-dad because he was her ex. You know? Uh-huh. Before he got saved. Well, you know, Jimmy used to say that people across the street from him after he got saved because they didn't want to hear his, I guess, sort of like Paul telling his test. Y'all know it. On August the 15th, 1971, at his aunt's house at 2:30 in the morning, and that's Aunt Mildred, Susie's mom, that he got scared and he ran to her house because he'd been in the car with a warlock, and he started to get away from that because he knew that was wrong. And she's the person, we know his story. Have at the old church. You know, I don't change him for you. Would everybody say yes? Do you know someone other than yourself for whom believing the gospel has dramatically changed their life? We do, don't we? Apostle Paul, on his second missionary journey, after having evangelized a short while in Macedonia, the cities of Philippi, this is last week's lesson, Thessalonica, and Berea, accompanied by brethren. I meant to Google this, but I think Athens is still considered part of Europe. The map we're going to see is you just see this land mass, but it's not labeled up there. So it does have labels on it, but you don't know what continent it is. So I'm thinking that it's still Europe. That asking for Silas and Timothy to come from Macedonia, the Spirit was stirred in him, distressed, because he saw how completely the city of idolatry. In the world of New Testament times, the images and temples of false gods were seen everywhere except among the Jews. They had the Ark of the Covenant, but by New Testament times it might have been lost. Centuries before this time, the Jews had been severely punished by God, driven into captivity and exile for their idolatry, and this permanently cured them of idolatry. Now that's what this book says. So there was nothing so believed in Jesus as the Messiah than to see people worshiping false gods. Or two or three. They had multiple. You know, in literature at school, we've learned about gods and the Roman gods, the god of war, the god of the sea, Poseidon. I used to read all that stuff growing up, but you got to realize what's true and what's just fun to read, you know. That's what I pray that my kids, my grandkids, even though they may have to hear stuff in that's not right, not what we call right, that they can discern good and evil. And Paul used every opportunity to proclaim the gospel, went to the in Athens and disputed, reasoned with the Jews and devout Gentiles. He also did the same thing in the market daily. And while reasoning with people in the marketplace, some Greek philosophers and we studied all this before, identified as Epicureans and Stoics, encountered Paul. They accused him of proclaiming strange gods. These people that have numerous gods accused Paul of having strange gods. And what was the difference? Because he Jesus and the resurrection. Now, I guess they only had hope in this life. They didn't, and the afterlife that they would talk about wasn't a pleasant afterlife. It was walking around in darkness and, which is the bad afterlife. But they didn't know a good afterlife. And when you hear about the resurrection, hey, what? There's hope? I'm not going to just die and go to the darkness. I could go to heaven. I can be with this man, Jesus, you're talking about. This will get your attention. And it says the Epicureans' philosophy was eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. And while the Stoics, who are the opposite, it sounds like right-brained and left-brained people, Stoics believed in a sternly self-disciplined lifestyle. Want to know more of what Paul was preaching, these philosophers brought him into the public meeting place for the Athenians. Now, this was atop the highest hill in Athens at 370 feet, Areopagus. For Mars Hill were the highest court in Athens. The hill was dedicated to the god of war, called by the Greeks Ares and by the Romans Mars. All right, now we've seen Paul in the synagogue, Mars Hill. Do you think that's going to change his testimony? No. He knows what happened on the road to Damascus, and you cannot convince him otherwise. And it changed his life. Or do you all feel you have that in you? That everybody, would you go down to the Walmart and stand out front and say, one day I was at youth camp and the preacher was preaching. I don't remember what the sermon was. Altar call, I wanted to go. And I prayed, and I've never been the same, but I was only 7 years old, and I've served God all my life. People would somebody would join with you. And yes, it calls, just if it comes up in some talk to somebody that we can, won't be an argument necessarily, you'll just be like a reasoning, not so much disputing. But Paul was determined for as many people as he could reach and ran to the chopping block. He got out of trouble once in Rome and went back there. Second trial. And he laid his life down for the Lord with no problem. He says, what do you think we should learn from Paul's practice of using it, shouldn't we? We should think, when we need boldness, what would Apostle Paul do in this situation? Say, what if you're up beside you and their music is so loud, it's rocking their car, and it's a bunch of bad words you don't want to hear? Turn yours up loud. Roll your window down, turn yours up loud. Music. That'd be what? Well, it'd just be making God louder than the devil. That's not rebellion. Not rebellion. That's when you copy. You use the same means that they're using, but you use it for good instead of bad. Yes, that's what that is. Well, you try it. Try it one day and then tell me. We'll see if somebody pulls up to you like that. Well, what if you've done it? Yeah. And what if you're out and you hear somebody just cussing up a storm? All right, Melinda. Did Did you rebuke them? He called you a bad word? What now? Yeah, yeah. Well, good, Melinda, Brooke. It takes gospel guts to do that, Brother Short. Uh huh. Far Eastern. Buddha. Pedestal like. Gone? I would too. Yeah. Oh, he didn't see you or hear what you said. You know, in the Bible, in the when they put the Ark of the Covenant, the Philistines, I think it was, in the same temple as their god, Dagon, that Dagon fell on his face and broke. Yes, great is our God and greatly to be praised. Now we're going to find Paul up here on Mars Hill, and they want to hear all this. You know, the Greeks want to hear something new all the time. Paul began his message to the Athenians who had assembled to hear him. We had a lesson on this just recently, didn't we? Because I had the wrong book, and we talked about this. Said they were too superstitious. He based this opinion on his observation of a shrine, some kind of setup, devoted to the unknown God, whom they ignorantly worshipped. They had so many gods, they were afraid to leave them one out, so they'd made a place for the unknown God, which could be any God, to make sure they weren't going to get the wrath of some God they had forgotten about. says there were so many shrines in Athens because the Athenians feared they might anger some god they failed to acknowledge. Therefore, they were superstitious. We're not listening this long clip. But there's always some that became believers in Christ. And one of the most influential people is this man, Dionysius. He is an Areopagite, which means he's a member of that high court, Areopagus. So this is very good, because if a real influential person gets saved, they have so much influence on other people. Why was Athens a difficult place to preach the gospel? Because of all the superstitions, because of all the false gods and idols. It says, in spite of the difficulty, Paul preached to the Jesus and the resurrection. What can we learn from this? We talked about that. I put in your ask a missionary. We had time to ask a missionary last week to hear. When we went to lunch later, we got to ask some more questions today. One of the questions we asked was about food. What do you do? I said, who makes